Hello, everyone, and welcome to this fourth webinar in our 2025 science series entitled Funding Rare Disease, Collaboration to Accelerate Treatment Innovation. I'm Erica Berg, Director and Senior Editor for Custom Publishing at Science, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion. This is our fifth year exploring the challenges and successes in rare disease, from research and advocacy to personal stories of triumph. This year, we have shifted our focus to rare disease communities. In today's webinar, we'll explore the diverse ecosystem of funders within the rare disease space, including philanthropic organizations, venture philanthropy, impact investors, and biotech developers. We'll discuss innovative funding models, the science behind investment efficiency, and the concept of spillover economics. We'll also examine how funders can collaborate and how their combined efforts can accelerate research and development for rare diseases. Now, before we get started, I wanted to give a few instructions to our viewers about how to use the viewing console. Just to the right of the video window is the Presenters tab, where you can find photographs and biographies of today's speakers. Now, we pre-recorded this webinar a few weeks before this broadcast, so we won't be able to take live questions from viewers, but we'll do our best to cover the topic as comprehensively as possible in the limited time we have. Feel free to leave comments for us using the Ask a Question tab to the right, and you can reach us there if you're having any technical issues. You can also email feedback to webinar@AAAS.org. Finally, a thank you to Foundation Ipsen for sponsoring today's event and this series. I'd now like to take the opportunity to welcome a brilliant panel today. I'll give each of them a chance to say hello and introduce themselves. I'll start off with our guest here in studio at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. First, I'd like to welcome Adora Ndu. Hello, Adora.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to join this esteemed panel. I'm really excited to join this very important conversation about how we can really drive the funding in rare diseases. As was mentioned, my name is Adora Ndu. I'm the Chief Regulatory Affairs Officer and the Executive Vice President of Portfolio Strategy and Management at BridgeBio Pharma. My background is in pharmacy and law, and I've spent the vast majority of my career in regulatory affairs, drug development, and especially rare diseases, where I've really found a near and dear place in my heart and professional career. And that's what brought me to BridgeBio. BridgeBio is a Bay Area biotech company that is focused on developing innovative treatments for rare genetic diseases. We were founded in 2015. Our first two approvals were in 2021 in ultra-rare disease space. So the first was for a disease known as MOCD type A, which at the time impacted just 400 known patients globally. And that was a challenging development program. We worked very closely with the agency, leveraging things like external controls to get the treatment available for patients. And most recently, we received our third approval in November of 2024 for another rare condition known as ATTR cardiomyopathy. We continue to drive forward in spaces that are difficult and challenging based on the science and the biology. We have a number of late-stage programs that are really trying to establish precedent and new therapies for diseases like limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, ADH1, as well as achondroplasia. So I'm really excited to be invited to join this really important conversation, especially focused on funding for rare diseases. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adora. Also here in studio, I'd like to welcome Terry Willie. Hello, Terry.
Hi, Erica. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Terry Willie. I am the Managing Director of Pathway to Cures, which is the venture philanthropy fund of the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation. Inheritable bleeding disorders are, by their very nature, rare diseases, so I'm working with a small subset of what Adora talked about. We're a venture philanthropy fund, which is very similar to a regular venture fund in that we invest for equity in companies that are developing cures and other means to address unmet needs in our community, in the inheritable bleeding disorders community. My background has been a combination of venture investing and technology transfer. In general, my vocation has been acting at the interface of for-profit and not-for-profit organizations to see that important early-stage life science discoveries are developed for the benefit of the public. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Terry. We are also pleased to have here in studio James Levine. Welcome, James.
Hi, Erica, and it's amazing to be here. This is a critical discussion. We need cures in rare disease, and this is going to be the mechanism for doing it. I'm president of Foundation Ipsen in Paris. I spent 30 years at Mayo Clinic working in translational research. I helped found 34 companies in healthcare, 17 of which went to Series A, and joined Foundation Ipsen about 5 years ago, partly because 2 members of my family have rare diseases, and what I realized was with 260 million people without cures, this is a massive, massive health need. At Foundation Ipsen, we have an academic group, the Crossvine Studio, and we publish papers and we conduct big data analyses on how to improve the efficiency of investment, how to better de-risk investment, and how to accelerate cures. And this is a critical discussion. I hope it continues, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks so much, James. And finally, a warm welcome to Paola Pozzi, joining us from Italy. Many thanks for being here, Paola.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you for having me remotely. It's really a great pleasure to be here with you today. So I'm Paola Pozzi. I'm a partner at Sofinova Partners, which is a leading venture capital firm based in Paris, with offices in London and Milano. We have a clear focus on investing in life science. We have 7 dedicated strategies that are investing across all the value chains, so starting from early stage to later stage investments. And as of today, we have over 4 billion of assets under management. I am a partner in one of the early stage funds that is dedicated to investing in Italy to create and grow company to become global players, with a specific focus on investing in genetic and rare disorders, thanks to a strategic partnership that we have put in place when we launched the fund in 2018 with Fondazione Teleton. Fondazione Teleton is a very well-renowned charity in Italy that has proven to be very successful in supporting basic translational and clinical research in the rare and genetic space, with the programs and the products that were also approved and are now on the market. So as of today, we have invested in 10 companies, and we are proud that we have a company with clinical stage programs in inherited retinal disorders with a good safety data and preliminary efficacy too. So I can tell you more about what we are doing, but this is the focus that I'm working in.
Thanks so much, Paola. And now let's begin. I'm going to put the first question to Terry, but everyone is welcome to add their thoughts on it. So, at a high level, what kind of trends are you seeing in terms of the amount of research activity, drug development, and clinical approval for drug developers working in rare disease?
We're seeing growth. We're seeing really accelerated growth with rare disease research and development and product development in the US, but even more so in Europe. There's currently over 10,000 rare diseases, but only about 5% of those have an FDA-approved therapy. So there is room for new curative therapies and approaches to addressing these unmet needs in the market. We're also seeing, I think very importantly, an increase in patient involvement, so very patient-centric approaches, opportunities to do decentralized trials, which is so important when you're dealing with small populations of individuals, to be able to try to meet them where they are, to see that they can participate in these studies. So all of that is very important, and we're seeing, like Foundation Ipsen, NORD, Every Life, disease-specific foundations like the one I work for, the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation, working together to make sure there continue to be government incentives to address these unmet needs. So there's a lot of good things going on, an increase in understanding the molecular biology and how these diseases works. That makes a big difference as well. But also we have to be cognizant of the cost. We've had some life-changing developments in gene and cellular therapy, but we also have some challenges to figure out the payer issues in order that we can make sure that these really innovative approaches can continue to change lives.
Thanks. You else have anything to add on that one?
I would add, from the regulatory perspective, one of the trends that we are seeing is continued focus on advancing treatments for rare diseases. When you look at the approvals coming out of the Food and Drug Administration over the last couple of years, rare disease outpace approvals for novel products. And so that's promising. And so our hope is that we continue to see that trend moving in the right direction, just because it is important. Similarly, when you look across the pond to the EU, we continue to see those trends progressing. I know we're going to touch on this, but obviously there's sort of an evolution in the regulatory and legislative environment as well, which is an important trend for drug developers right now, sort of trying to navigate that as we have some innovative clinical trial designs that we are advancing forward, and being able to align with health authorities on drug development, initiating clinical trials, the regulatory path forward, and ultimately getting these products approved for patients. So that's also another trend that we are navigating.
I mean, I would agree 100% with what you've said, both of you, but I think what's really fascinating is this is truly evolving, and things are evolving very, very fast in the rare disease space. There's been speak about venture funding peaking at 23 billion in 21, and then with a bit of cooling. But now with new platforms, with new trial designs, with, of course, artificial intelligence, which is massively going to impact how we provide cures for 6,500, 7,000 diseases, 94% of patients have no treatment. I think this is one of the most dynamic parts of medicine. And I think with individualized medicine also being a mainstream concept, I think this is probably the most exciting and dynamic time in the rare disease space.
Fantastic. Paula, I was wondering if you could share with us your take on what the current state of public or government funding for rare disease research and therapeutic development relative to other disease areas. What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, it's so you are asking governmental and let's say public funding. So I can tell you what Fondazione Teleton has been doing over the 30 years of history that they have been operating in Italy with us solely dedicated really to supporting translation of research in rare and genetic disorders. So they have invested over 740 million dedicated really to translating these research. So as I mentioned earlier, they started investing at preclinical and translational, and then they ended up with supporting most of the clinical trials that then were approved by EMA. So, for instance, Trimvelis is the first ex vivo gene therapy approved in Europe, and that was in 2016, where the field was still very mature. But what Italy has is a strong excellence in advanced therapy development. So, working with top scientists that are worldwide renowned, that have built over time not only the basic and translational, but also all the clinical expertise really to translate these research programs to products that have been approved and are now products available for patients. So what the impressive work that a charity has been able to do in these years with this strong dedication to quality and to research and really supporting what is the best Italian excellence in this field has really paid off. So we see that there are products that are now available to patients. And Trimvelis, for instance, have treated over 45 patients until now. It's really a rare disease indication, but the success of this story has also enabled Fondazione Teleton to move forward more and more products. So that is a fascinating story, and I'm saying this because before joining Sofinova Partners, so being an investor, I've spent 14 years in technology transfer in academia. So I have seen these progress moving forward. I was actually in a very prestigious research university hospital at that time, where I have seen these programs moving from translational work in the lab to the clinic, so to the bedside, and it's really been a tremendous effort that was turned out to be successful. So there are a number of products now that are moving towards approval, and with Strimvelis and Livdelzi, another therapy for MLD already approved. So I guess this is only the beginning, but it's these are successful stories that we have to highlight and be proud of.
Great, thank you. Any differences, regional differences that we should point out here? I know different from that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that, historically in the U.S., there have been several mechanisms and tools for funding, federal funding, to advance research and development. In the last 8 months or so, there's been more uncertainty introduced in that space, especially funding coming out of NIH to academic institutions. What I would say is, for a company like BridgeBio, when we were founded in 2015, that was at the core of our ability to identify new compounds. We had a team of, we called them, drug searchers. They were essentially going from institution to institution, meeting with researchers, understanding, the science behind, novel compounds, the biology of disease, and identifying potential collaborations. And so we established a number of collaborations with many academic institutions many, many years ago. And so in the more recent terms, there have been some disruptions to the funding coming out of NIH, especially to different research institutions. And so we continue to watch that space to see the progress there and where things land. As far as FDA is concerned, there are a few tools that are available. FDA does issue orphan drug grants, primarily focused on natural history studies, and so those are to my understanding, not impacted to date. So we hope that they continue as well. And then you have, ARPA-H that has their funding and the work that they do, very important work in the rare disease space. And so, we're hopeful because a lot of this research is important. It usually is sort of the feeding into ongoing development that other companies such as BridgeBio would come in and help advance and take to the finish line. So there is a big role that federal funding plays. I think we probably have to start to think about, novel approaches. Maybe it's more of a public-private, approach to funding rare disease drug development, and I'm sure we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that shortly. But there are certainly regional differences that we should be conscious of.
Yeah. And we're encouraged too by seeing some foundations step up to address some unmet needs in funding, because also our investments are often very early stage companies. Many of them are university or teaching hospital spin out, so that loss of that type of funding is notable. One of our companies recently received an award from Wellcome Leap out of the UK. So Wellcome had put together a £600 million program for addressing unmet needs in certain areas, and one of them is in bleeding disorders, in better understanding heavy menstrual bleeding as a real issue and as something that we need to understand better overall, because it as an indicator in women's health. And so this is exciting to see this type of stepping up, across the world to look at some areas where there are unmet needs and seeing what can be done to leverage the good work that's going on.
And I'd like to feed off that actually from the European Union. I think there are two observations. First of all, at policy level, for example, in France, rare diseases is a sort of a national policy priority. Same in Germany, and I think there's a lot of activity in Italy as well. And then the European Union sort of has backed that up, for example, with a $168 million grant for the ADERA program, which is literally to build a deep meshed ecosystem across the European Union to really drive accelerated development. And I think as we think about rare diseases, these are truly international disorders. And I think, therefore, the idea of international collaboration is highlighted in these kind of meetings. And even in the panel here today, you get a sense of the international priority. I mean, for example, funding from the Wellcome Trust, funding from the European Union, and of course NIH has SBIR and STTR grants for young biotechs who need that accelerated funding. So I think funding community is sort of the title of the webinar, but I see how critically important that is.
Thank you. Adora, and I think you addressed this briefly, but I just wanted to ask about the regulatory environment in this space and how agencies like the FDA or the EMA are incentivizing and prioritizing the development of drugs for rare and orphan indications.
Sure, I'll start with the EMA since it's probably more straightforward right now. I mean, EMA has always incentivized drug development for rare diseases, and they continue to. For example, with two pathways that I will call out, conditional approval and exceptional circumstances, essentially both recognizing that there will be limitations in the data sets that are submitted for rare disease drug reviews and approvals. And so those continue. I think there have been a number of approvals, first in disease areas that have gone through those pathways and have been able to make those treatments available for patients broadly. The U.S. also, the FDA has historically and continues to navigate this in a different way. I would say, the FDA is going through the natural evolution given change in leadership and change in, structures internally within the agency. And so I think more broadly externally, we are observing, we are waiting to see where things settle. If we're reading the tea leaves at this time, what we can say is that there is interest and focus in continuing to advance and support and incentivize rare disease drug development. And, areas where that we're seeing that, for example, in 2024, FDA rolled out the Rare Disease Hub, which is essentially infrastructure within the agency to help increase consistency across review divisions and offices, because that was one area of concern that companies were facing. More recently this year, we've seen a few things announced. There was a JAMA article a couple of months ago that was penned by the new commissioner of FDA, and one of the things that he talked about in there is really trying to establish this new pathway for rare diseases via plausible mechanism. So that's something that we continue to watch. A couple of months ago, they also announced this new voucher program, the Commissioner's National Priority Voucher Program. And while that program, essentially what that program will do is that it will expedite review and approval. So possibly products could be approved within 1 to 2 months, as early as 1 to 2 months after the package is submitted, which is pretty significant if we're able to accomplish that, especially as you think about NPV and funding and ROI. All of those things are directly relevant to this new Commissioner's National Priority Voucher. Now, the voucher has not been rolled out specifically for rare diseases, but it does include rare diseases. One of the priorities that have been laid out are addressing a high unmet need. And so to the extent that these new innovative products are addressing high unmet need or represent a significant shift in innovation to treat a particular disease area, they could potentially leverage this voucher to make the treatment available much faster for patients. And then more recently, just a matter of days ago, there was a new pathway announced, Rare Disease Evidence Principles, which focuses on very rare diseases, so less than 1,000 patients impacted. And so for diseases within that space, a developer would be able to submit an application to FDA. And what essentially that does is the agency collectively would recognize that more streamlined, flexible approaches should be applied to this product for this disease. So for example, leveraging a single adequate and well-controlled study, plus confirmatory evidence, plus novel biomarkers, and potentially a limited data set to establish the standard of substantial evidence of approval. And so while the packaging of this new incentive that has been rolled out is currently available, my sense is that they are trying to establish a process that makes it easier so sponsors don't have to receive mixed feedback depending on who's reviewing your product and where it lies. And once you have this designation, you should be able to leverage this. And so I think that's sort of a nod to, yes, we're focused on rare diseases, yes, we're interested, and we are trying to roll out a few incentives for development in this space.
Great, thank you. So that was wonderful look at sort of the current ecosystem of where we are, even though things might be changing and shifting fairly quickly in this space. Did you have something?
Yeah, Adora, I'm actually sort of intrigued by something you said. We've been working in the UK with MHRA, and one of the analyses we did on their innovation hub, particularly in rare disease development, was to look at the economic impact for the country. And not only was there a very positive ROI in terms of invest in regulatory and you get a return in terms of encouraging biotech to come to the country, but there are also a lot of spillover economics associated with that. And so I'm very curious as to your take as to how critical the regulatory environment is and in terms of encouraging cures to come to market.
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, when the ability for developers to have certainty in the regulatory process, to be able to develop their treatments in as streamlined and efficient drug development as possible, and to actually get those treatments available to patients, that has tremendous spillover economics. When you see a lot of these rare disease therapies are being developed by very small biotech companies, many of them have one product under development. So it's critical that they're able to engage with health authorities like MHRA, EMA, FDA, and get reasonable feedback for pragmatic drug development so that that company can continue to exist and they can actually see their product through and actually get to patients, generate revenue, and then continue to expand their development into other areas and other diseases. So I think it's absolutely critical.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about some of these funding models that help bring these life-saving medications to market. So Terry, to what extent are you seeing dedicated venture capital funding in support of commercial development of new therapies for rare diseases, and how has this activity been changing in recent years?
Yeah, well, we're very lucky to have Adora's fund among us. Unfortunately, you're not the norm, but it's wonderful to have this type of expertise, smart money in an investment involving a rare disease. What I'm seeing are more and more disease-specific foundations enlarging or launching for the first time venture philanthropy funds. And certainly the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation is an example of that. We only launched in 2023, so we're a newcomer in that regard. And part of the contribution to mission in doing that is to say there are a lot of solutions out there in research laboratories, in early stage biotech companies. Some of them are specific to our community in bleeding disorders, and some of them are really amazing platforms that could be applied to our patient population. And what would it take for them to move those off the back burner into their pipeline? What do they need? And it's oftentimes money, but oftentimes it's understanding the patient population. We call them lived experienced experts. So sometimes it's just understanding the nuances and the biology of the disease, and then the capability to syndicate, to find other folks to co-invest with you and establish a strong, investment case in order to see this idea reach the public and patients in a meaningful way. So we're seeing more disease-specific foundations. We're seeing top-tier and traditional venture funds participate in these rounds when there is, especially when there's a platform. In our case, some of our indications might not be their big winner, but they can be very powerful clinical proof of principle to show that the platform has legs and could lead to impacting even larger populations and impacting health. So that's really exciting. And I'm starting to see, and maybe this is just wishful thinking on my part, but a continued involvement and maybe an increased involvement from family offices. So sophisticated family offices across the world who have an interest in rare disease. And the challenge is figuring out which ones are interested and doing that kind of matchmaking, because there's not a straightforward way to do that. So some hope there in lots of different varieties of funding, and then having experienced people and experienced funds and experienced entrepreneurs coming together to put those types of funding rounds together so that they make sense, interests are aligned, and these companies can get to the finish line with their product development.
Add, or Paula, so you're part of a dedicated program focused on the commercialization of rare disease research from the Telethon Foundation. Can you tell us more about how that program works and how such a design can accelerate the clinical translation for therapies that are rooted in promising academic research?
Thank you. So actually, I'm going to build on what Terry just said because I'm in full agreement. And, we are an early stage fund. So what we do is that we pick breakthrough potential, technology that is developed in academia, and we build a company out of it. So, we have to be very focused and dedicated in identifying what we believe is really the truly breakthrough potential therapy to become a product for rare disease patients. So it's a hurdle per se because you have to invest early, and when we invest, we typically invest at seed stage. So a couple of millions or up to 4, let's say, for a seed investment. And we have to make sure, since the seed investment, that we will be able to grow the company and attract dedicated funding to make sure that the programs are actually reaching a clinical proof of concept. So that is really the struggle for us, for venture funds that are really looking at early stage investment. So be able to select, looking at quality and what we believe is the best science available, and also making sure that we translate in a entrepreneurial and industry in the industry settings what has been done and promoted at academic level. So it's a long journey, and I'm saying this because I'm mostly focused on investing in advanced therapies because, as I mentioned, Italy has a renowned excellence in this field, and so we know that these are highly capital intensive investments. So when we decide to make an investment, we have a high bar. So we really look and make sure that we are investing also in the right team. And at Sofinnova, we always say that we invest in science and team. And the importance of the team that is behind, looking really at the early developers in academia, but also being able to develop the right team that is successfully translating to the clinic. So I'm talking about the regulators and all the CMC efforts behind the programs that need to be further supported, and having the right managerial experience to bring these companies forward and successfully translate to the clinic.
Great. Thanks so much for telling us about that. So this came up already, and I wanted to get a bit more into it, James. Spillover. So rare disease research can produce spillover benefits in terms of benefits that are beyond the direct benefit to any one patient community in domains such as technology development or biological knowledge. Can you talk about these effects and how they can amplify the impact of an R&D investment in rare disease research?
Yes, I mean, I think there's been sort of an evolution of thinking in how terms of spillovers are working. Initially in the rare disease space, when one was building cures, it was almost sort of one of the market arguments. You know, the market is small, but the market could be bigger because this therapy, for example, in a very ultra-rare obesity model could be used across the obesity market. And I think that mechanism, although initially exceptionally powerful, has now evolved into something much more sophisticated and I think probably more useful for the rare disease community as a whole. So, for example, you think about platform technologies, whether those are gene therapies, you think about natural history data acquisition platforms and how those can be used across multiple rare diseases. And I think spillover economics isn't just about now market, it's also about access and sort of cost of generating new therapies, plus the ability to generate new therapies very quickly. And I think the idea of spillover economics isn't just economics anymore, but it's also spillover therapeutics. And what I think is indisputable, because there are so many rare diseases and so many of them have, for example, genetic mechanisms, more than half. Some of them have external drivers, which are, for example, neurological degeneration. The idea, therefore, that spillovers are ultimately going to become an opportunity for artificial intelligence to drive a massive acceleration in our ability to develop not only therapies, but also therapies at much less cost. And I think the combination of those two things are extremely important as we see the evolution in the therapeutic markets.
Great, thanks. Is that how the rest of you all think about it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. You know, when I think about development and the regulatory space, quite often the spillover is certainly there. It's sort of what we saw with oncology, right? With a lot of innovative approaches within the oncology space, and we borrow from that in rare. And so now what's happening is the similar conversations are happening when we look at rare and what we can take from rare and apply to more common diseases. With regards to some of the trial designs, development of novel biomarkers, you know, the use of a single adequate and well-controlled study and what level of data should be sufficient, and the role of confirmatory evidence in those instances. So we're certainly seeing that, and the ultimate impact of that is to your point, that streamlines drug development. It reduces costs of drug development, it reduces the time, the end-to-end cycle of development from you know, the non-clinical to clinical and to ultimate commercialization.
And can I just add that if we can help you know, make generation of therapies much faster and less expensive, ultimately, of course, the cost of the therapy becomes less expensive. And this is a major barrier to access to healthcare around the world. And so I think these are actually very, very big issues, and the need is astronomical globally. And as we have these discussions about investment drivers, these become very important discussions.
Terry, as an investor, what are some of the key considerations that you look for when bringing a potentially promising rare disease startup into your portfolio?
The considerations are traditional venture considerations for the most part. I mean, we invest like a traditional early stage life science investor in many ways. We want to make sure that the idea is solid and the team is solid, or we can attract the team to the company. But I think the way that we are different is that we are narrowly focused on inheritable blood and bleeding disorders. And we do not have a traditional venture structure in that we don't have traditional limited partners that we share returns with. We're an evergreen fund, and our funding comes from donors. So any equity realizations, any returns on our investment go back into the fund for reinvestment and to support our community. So those things are different. But in order for the companies we invest in to be successful, they have to have a strong investment case to traditional investors. So that we follow that best practice. And I think that's very important. The way that this fund is different than others that I've worked in or other type of investing I've worked in is that we put a very heavy lift on the front end on science and clinical evaluation. And we have an amazing scientific advisory group made up of key opinion leaders, mostly from the US, but from around the world in inheritable blood and bleeding disorders. And they are available to us. They are volunteers. We meet at least monthly and usually more than that with specific opportunities. And that's proving to be just extraordinary into what we can eke out and what advice we can give back to those companies as well, because we want them all to be successful whether we invest or not. And then we move on to our traditional investment committee and developing an investment memo investment case. So even though we're venture philanthropy, we're only successful if we can build the strong investment case that attracts syndicate partners.
Well, Terry, as you know, I'm like an addict to what you do. I think it's amazing.
I know, you've written a book about
No, this is a plug for the Venture Philanthropy book. It's free, so it's free, Amazon.com, download it, share it. But no, if I may, I mean, I think you've absolutely exemplified not that venture philanthropy is sort of the poor person's venture capital. I think it's the opposite, because in venture philanthropy, working on blood disorders, you access the world experts, whereas traditional venture capitalists have to sort of go out and hire people with, who are of course expert, but don't have that deep internal commitment to solve the problems. And that aligned with the needs of patients, I think, is the most powerful funding mechanism imaginable. And of course, at FDA, patients are welcome to the floor to express the need to accelerate cures. And so I think the venture philanthropy model in rare diseases, and I admit to the addiction, is so powerful. And I think what you do is critically important as a model of a successful method of bringing investment and ultimately cures under the banner of philanthropy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other important ways that venture philanthropy sort of differs from traditional approaches to venture capitalism, venture funding models?
I mean, I think it is fundamentally the ultimate commitment to patients that differentiates venture capital from venture philanthropy. And I think, to me, one of the most interesting examples of that is if you work with venture philanthropy organizations. We've published data with 24 actually. And what you see is venture philanthropists are less worried about an early stage chemical or biologic not making it. They're much more committed to whether this has the potential to impact the patient, patients receiving cures. And that utter commitment to patients, I think, is what differentiates venture philanthropy from true venture capitalism. And you might say, well, isn't that a lesser economic model? I don't think it is. I think it's an exceptionally powerful economic model. And in fact, the data don't suggest that it's a more risky investment. In fact, quite the contrary. If anything, under the right management, and the management of venture philanthropy is now becoming extremely sophisticated, present company included, Paola, that this is a very powerful investment tool.
One of the themes that emerged as we were looking at our pipeline of companies, we've met with about 220 companies since we launched, which is a small number compared to the throughput in traditional venture funds. But one of the common themes that we've seen, especially in companies that were already into the clinic or getting ready to launch their first human studies, is they were late in engaging patients. And because of that, there were nuances in the study design that could have been corrected earlier. And what I mean by that, they had put together good clinical models, good clinical study design that would get them through the FDA, but not with a product that was going to be as attractive to the people that they were trying to meet. So they might have an FDA-approved product, but maybe not one that would have the market penetration that they hoped for, to put it in business terms. And so one of the things that's been very important to us is to continue to engage earlier and earlier, and even when we're not investing, to advise, to put our virtual advisor groups together with patients for these companies, and to make sure that they are considering these nuances because they're critical to their success. And that is very synergistic with reaching patients better sooner.
Yeah, I mean, one
And
thing I
Terry,
would
if
add
I
to,
may.
go ahead.
Oh
Go ahead,
yeah,
Paul.
sorry, but I was just reading full agreement with what Terry just said. So we're seeing the same in our portfolio company. So really engaging with patient advocacy and patients associations earlier, and the benefit of doing that for really translating these products to the clinic.
Yeah, I would agree with that, both in the for-profit as well as the nonprofit model. It's critical. At Bridge Bio, the patient voice is at the core of every decision that we make, even as a for-profit company. And it's critical early, mid, late. And so when we are doing some exploratory work to identify different conditions that we would like to pursue research and development, we're speaking with the patient community. When we are developing the protocols, we are speaking with the patient community. When we are engaging with regulators, we're speaking and involving the patient community throughout that process. But one thing I wanted to build on with regards to the venture philanthropy discussion was, I think that this is critical, especially in the ultra-rare disease space. The diseases where the commercial viability is limited or non-existent. And so for the products that are either NPV neutral or marginally positive, thinking about the innovative funding models that could enable products that have solid science to continue to advance is important. And there's sort of a groundswell that's ongoing right now of different groups looking at this very carefully. We've been involved in a number of conversations to see what can we do to help enable this conversation and some actual traction to pick up, so that, because when you speak with companies, it's fascinating how many drugs for very rare diseases are shelved. They're sitting on shelves across many companies, across many academic institutions, primarily because of funding. And so the mechanism of being able to take these products off the shelf, pull together some funding, venture philanthropy being one of the key areas and opportunities for actually advancing these treatments forward. There's a huge opportunity out there. And I think these conversations need to continue so that those products that are shelved, not because they didn't have solid science, but because they didn't have the commercial viability, and as a result didn't have adequate funding, can be taken off the shelves and into the hands of patients.
I mean, Adora, can I just build on that a little bit? I mean, I couldn't agree more. We run a meta studio, and one of our big interests is bundling assets. So the idea that you can take multiple assets, bundle them, and ultimately serve multiple people with rare diseases because you've developed a big enough market to be successful. But I think one of the other things that I agree, there's a real groundswell of interest right across this space. And I think there are multiple alternate mechanisms of funding which are becoming more and more interesting. I think venture philanthropy has sort of led the charge in this regard. But you have social impact bonds, crowdfunding, which is very relevant to patient groups, collaborative consortia. There's even sort of tax incentives and policy drivers, as you were already talking about, and all sorts of sort of very innovative research network approaches. And I think this is the big banner of hope in the rare disease space, that in a sense rare diseases, I think, is sort of going to drive individualized medicine, in the sense that here are a group of patients that emergently need help, and here are these multiple mechanisms of bringing patients at the front of the investment model and ultimately allowing patients to drive cures that are going to help hundreds of millions of people.
Oh, exciting. I want to talk a little bit from the drug developer's perspective. I think we've been doing that to a certain extent already, but given the small number of patients for a particular medication. What are some strategies for making taking on such a risk more compelling to investors? Paula, can we start with you?
So yeah, I guess we need to make sure that we are implementing and efficiently optimizing and all different strategies. So we've been talking about philanthropy and venture capital investments. So we have to build investment cases that are strong, and we have to make sure that we have all the enabling elements to make sure that these products become affordable also to patients. So, it's really a long cycle, but we have to make sure that all the key players are working together to make these products, available to patients in an efficient way. So, I'm thinking about, also, you know, uh, the fragmentation that there is in this environment. So we need to make sure that we are working together to avoid that at regulatory level, for instance, but streamlining, of course, operations, being more efficient in the clinical translation. So all the expedite pathways that were mentioned earlier. And, importantly also, the cost of goods of these therapies, as I mentioned earlier, mostly involved in advanced therapy. So these are heavily, affecting also the adoptions of these therapies. So, it's a combination of factors, I believe, but above all, we have to make sure that we are investing in high quality and we are supporting these translational moving forward. So, for instance, I'd also like to mention the importance of improving the diagnosis of these patients because, if we are also able, because there are so many undiagnosed patients out there. So if we are able also to improve the diagnosis and also using the artificial intelligence that James mentioned earlier, to be able to grow also the number of patients that can actually benefit from these therapies. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are a number of factors that we need to put together to make sure that we are streamlining the approval process of these therapies. And again, most of all is the quality and the capacity, that also the capital efficiency, really, that as investors we have to make sure that is bringing a product that at the end of the day becomes sustainable for the health system and the insurance system.
I mean, I think I 100% agree. There's one thing I think we haven't mentioned yet, and I think we're all aware of it, but it's sort of the elephant in the room, so to speak, is the idea of one way of improving the return on investment on all of these ventures is to better de-risk the investments in the first place. And we know in the rare disease space, which is actually akin to standard medicine development, is the risk is approximately 80 to 90% of investments don't produce cures. And so therefore there is a massive opportunity to more efficiently de-risk these investments to therefore better deliver cures. And the economic consequence of that is if you can better de-risk, you make investment more efficient, that brings more investors to the table, and ultimately you get cures much, much more quickly by simple sort of financial structures. And so we've invested, as others have as well, all investment houses invest in this space, but is to understand better how to economically de-risk these investments. And part of that is pooled assets, there are different mechanisms of doing that. Part of that is deep due diligence and biomarkers and so on and so forth. But again, I think with the new mathematics that are coming on board, with the better data gathering, with big data sets, this is going to get better and better, and the opportunities are going to unfold day by day.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, just building on what's already been said, which I fully agree with, starting with solid science, right? Foundationally, the compound from a safety and efficacy perspective, and being able to walk through the proof of concept and through the clinic, critical. I think that's foundational for any product development and being able to take that forward and ensuring that you have the ROI, but also critical. I want to build on the efficiency piece. Efficiency in two areas, one operationally, but then also in the research and development are critical. Efficient research and development really looks like pragmatic drug design, expedited clinical trial recruitment, being able to stand up your trials very quickly, being able to think through innovative approaches to actually speed up the drug development. And that requires sort of a little bit of foresight and rigorous negotiation with the agency to really align on what is essentially the basic requirement, the minimum data set that is required in order for us to understand and have confidence that this treatment is safe and effective, and being able to advance that forward. On the efficient operations, that is one of the areas, in addition to science and patient voice, that BridgeBio has optimized. That is at the core, another pillar of us, our organization foundationally, because we're a hub and spoke model. So we have our central organization, our central services, which is where we have a few of the shared services, but then we have smaller companies that we have spun out, and each of those companies is focused on driving and executing on the development of specific program areas. They're lean teams, they're experts, they're focused on executing. And so we're able to spread the risk across the organization because each of these companies is focused on distinct disease areas. We're able to pull in experts within each of these smaller companies. And so, we drive forward, and what this does is, having one product perhaps not make it to a certain milestone doesn't impact the rest of the portfolio and the rest of the organization. So from a de-risking perspective, that is also, one of the core areas that we're focused on. We actually published on this in 24 in the Journal of Portfolio Management, where we talk about the model that BridgeBio has leveraged and established to really move very quickly, minimize risk with a very lean operating infrastructure.
Great, thank you. So I think we're getting close to running out of time, so I think this will be our last question for today, and I would love if everyone took a turn sharing their thoughts. So are there other innovative funding models that you see emerging that could meaningfully move the needle in terms of accelerating rare disease drug development? Let's start with Paula.
Yeah, I guess, the funding model per se needs to, look at return on investment. So, and building really a strong investment case per se. But what I liked about the conversation today is also how we highlighted also the importance of leveraging, for instance, with platform technologies, the learnings and capitalize from one product to the other. So making this process more efficient. So I guess, what I would really very much encourage is programs, where these platform, let's say, designation expedite programs are really more and more facilitated and also really put to practice. Other models that are really also efficiently sustaining and helping companies to be capital efficient, such, the priority review voucher, for instance, which is a great benefit for whoever is developing these kind of drugs. So, I think that what we have to do and make sure is that we combine different, and we get access to different funding opportunities. It's not only the venture capital per se that can solve the problem. It's a combination of factors, and the importance of having a streamlined and regulatory, framework that really enables this efficiently. And, really trying to avoid the fragmentation among different systems, because at the end of the day, we're all doing this work for the benefit of patients. So, it doesn't really matter who's doing it, but as long as we are looking at the quality and making this an efficient process, it should work out.
Thanks. James?
I think we're at a coalition of opportunity in the rare disease space. We have platforms, we have artificial intelligence, we have funding fluidity, we have regulatory intelligence, and also I think we have smart de-risking, and I think the concomitant arrival of all of these things at exactly the same time in history is going to unveil a massive flood of opportunity in the rare disease therapeutic space. And I think now literally is the time of opportunity, and it's fantastic that we're here today to talk about it.
Thanks. Terry?
Well, and at the end of the day, too, it still takes people to coordinate all that, line it up, make sure all the smart people play nice together, so that so we can make this happen. And I think that's very important too. And one group that we're grateful to is Launch Bio for doing that kind of matchmaking, rare disease and investors, and now more and more family offices and so forth. And despite all these new technologies and innovations that we have, it still takes people to pull it all together and make it happen.
So what I would add is, Paula, I heard you mention the priority review voucher, which I think is a critical, very much appreciated incentive for drug development in the pediatric rare disease space. And as we all know, it was not reauthorized, and we wait very patiently to see if it will be reauthorized, because that voucher has proven to be a lifeline for many developers that are in the rare disease space. Our first approval, we received the priority review voucher. We sold it, and we were able to redistribute the revenue across other development areas to continue drug development in this space. So it is critical. So that's one. And then the second piece I would add is on the wish list, which is the role that a federal fund could play in the ultra rare space where there is no commercial development. We see a lot of families that are really searching for treatment for their disease or their child's disease, and you see families and parents become drug developers because nobody else is doing anything in that space. And so there are many small companies that have been established by families. And so I think there's an opportunity to think about, how do you enable research in that space where there is no research that is happening? And I think there's a role for a federal fund to be established in the ultra rare space where there's no commercial viability to advance these forward.
Unfortunately, we'll have to stop there as we've run out of time. Many thanks to all our panelists for being with us today. It's been a delight talking to you all. I learned so much, and I hope our audience did as well. A reminder to our viewers that you can see a recording of this webinar as well as all the previous events in the series at science.org/webinars. This webinar is the fourth in a series of 7 running this year, so look out for more soon. If you'd like to send your thoughts, email webinar@AAAS.org. Thank you once again to our panel and to Foundation Ipsen for enabling this conversation through their kind sponsorship. Goodbye, everyone.